All right, so we're going to get started. Welcome, everybody. My name is Jessel Noor. I'm the project manager for Advancing Democracy, as well as the democracy manager at Solutions Journalism Network. Um, Thank you so much for joining us today. This is part 2 of our ongoing series, bringing you the advancing democracy skills in a way that's easy to digest and access. Um, so if you're not familiar, Advancing Democracy is a collaboration between Solutions Journalism Network, Hearken, Trusting News, and Good Conflict. We ran 3 cohorts over the past 3 years, had a lot of success, and we wanted to find a way to make all these skills more accessible and easier to access for newsrooms that are looking to integrate some innovative strategies in how they approach politics and democracy. So if you missed our first session on mission statements, that session is recorded. I'll send that link out in this email recap with the recording of this session and additional links we bring up. And if you have any questions about Advancing Democracy or any of our upcoming programming, please let me know. You'll be getting an email from me afterwards, and I'll drop my email in the chat as well. But I'm going to hand it over to Bridget. We have an hour, and we want to make sure there's plenty of time for engagement. So feel free to put your questions in the chat, and we'll try to get to all of them. But I'm going to hand it over to Bridget.
Thank you so much, Jessel. And I should mention this is the second in the Advancing Democracy series, but the first of the engagement specific webinars. So if you're thinking, oh no, I missed one, it's okay. We've got another one coming up in August on engagement that I'll tell you about. So I'm Bridget Thorson. I am the Chief Project Officer / Dream Wrangler at Hearken, which has been working with newsrooms on engagement for 10 years now. And that is my real title. And like Jessel said, we've got an hour here today. This is a session on engagement. So while we have quite a bit of ground to cover, I really do want to hear from you. So if you want to hold questions till the end, you can, but otherwise feel free to mix it up in the chat or even just come off mute and ask your questions if you think it would be beneficial for the whole group. We've got an incredible group here today. I'm really excited. So this specific session is on engagement strategies for democracy reporting. And what's so interesting about this, we've been working with newsrooms for 10 years, but I've got some pipe and fresh insights from the 2024 election cycle that we're going to get into. And I'm also really curious to hear from all of you about what kind of engagement work you've been doing, whether it's on election coverage or on ongoing governance. And those added up is what we mean by democracy reporting. All right, so let's get into it, shall we? If you haven't heard of Hearken before, we are what we call a social impact consultancy, but we're really all about the power of listening and incorporating that into better serving and understanding both audiences and larger communities. And this includes our Election SOS initiative, which first launched right before 2020, which was quite a time to launch. And just to give you a sense of the type of work we've been doing, in 2024, we trained 156 journalists from 35 newsrooms in this engaged election reporting, this idea of using engagement to inform your election coverage. And 53 public media stations specifically across 44 states used Hearken's tools and approach to engage their audiences. So got a lot of great insights into how you can apply this to your own reporting and coverage. And here's what we're going to talk through today. Again, chime in anytime, and Jess will enjoy her watching the chat for me, and they'll feel free to chime in as well as my Advancing Democracy collaborators here. We'll go over some foundations for engagement. I would guess many of you are already doing engagement in your newsrooms, but maybe looking for ways to apply it to democracy specifically. And I'd love to hear in the chat if you have a specific goal in mind for today's session. Just go ahead and put that in there right now so I can be sure that we address it. What's one thing you would like to get out of today's session? Please share that in the chat. What do I want out of today's session? Maybe you saw my post about Elmo cakes. We'll get there. You want to get an Elmo cake visual, it's coming. One thing you'd like to get out of today's session. One question you're holding. What do we got? How to introduce a new independent community newsroom. I'm thinking probably introduce to the public, right? Thank you so much. Great. Appreciate that. Dizzy face. Anything else? Any other goals for today? What's something that would be really helpful to your work right now in terms of engagement? Ooh, building trust. We've got Joy Meyer in the house. She can talk about that. Excellent. Hosting a successful community listening event. Great. And Marie, I've got another really excellent webinar we ran recently that may be interesting to you. So I'll follow up there. Trainings for journalists doing local reporting. Okay, local reporting, love it. In-person community engagement strategies. Ah, the off-election year, yes, especially with young people. Launching a community info needs assessment, excellent. Ooh, brainstorming a reporting project I could pitch to my news director that would help bring more engagement into the newsroom in general. The Trojan horse approach. We love it. Strategies for engaging disengaged audiences. Ooh, engaging what medium? Okay, thank you. These are great goals. And so keep that in mind. And also, if you see something in the chat that you want to respond to, please feel free, hit that reply button. We've got a wealth of expertise in the room. And that's the wonderful thing about engagement is that it really is this experimental approach, as we'll see, ensuring that you can reach different communities, healthy ways. Look at this, healthy ways to measure engagement metrics. Okay. Wonderful. So please keep those goals in mind. And at any moment when you feel like it might be a good moment to get into some of these questions, feel free. And Jess will enjoy if you see me getting to a point where any of these topics might be good. Oh, thank you very much. Yes, Thorson with the O, because we got two Thorsons on the call today. I just always say I was a reporter, so I'll just wait an uncomfortably long time until I get an answer. That's how I frame it. So as we go through foundations for engagement, this might be particularly relevant for those of you looking to like introduce a new effort, like the person who said they want to bring more engagement into the newsroom, or also just if you're already engaging, even if it's already a really well-oiled machine in your newsroom, do a little gut check about whether you feel like you are hitting these foundations to the extent that you can. So next, we're going to get into some case studies. And again, if you're looking to either launch or accelerate an engagement effort, what thing do journalists love? They love showing examples of where it worked elsewhere. It makes it really easy to make the case to the higher ups, like, well, blah, blah, blah did this, right? And then we're going to see how you can get started incorporating this into your own coverage. So people interested in like, how can we ensure that we're reaching communities or reaching people maybe we haven't been reaching? This will probably be the section that'll be really helpful for you. Then we'll get into Q&A. We're going to stay as a full group today. But certainly, as I said, feel free to speak up at any moment, pop anything in the chat. I want you to come away from today's session with some real strategies that you can apply right away to your work. It's Monday, so let's get this going this week. Sound good? Ready to rock and roll? All right, Jessel, Joy, anything that you saw come up in those goals that you want to address right away? Building trust through engagement, or we can wait until later in the
I
presentation.
do have thoughts, but I think we can let them evolve naturally.
Okay,
See where
we'll
you
let
take
those
us
thoughts
first.
evolve. Sounds good. So let me start with an example that I love about what we're talking about when we're talking about engaging for democracy. Santa Cruz Local, I don't know that you're in the house today, but based in California, and they've run engagement efforts around their election coverage for several cycles now, with surveys and interviews with hundreds of residents about their concerns. And they use that to shape their voter guide. So this is an election cycle specific example. 600 responses to their online surveys, 100 conversations to their in-person interviews, and 60 participants to community listening sessions. And I choose this example to start out with because to me, it really shows the power of the iterative, incremental approach. They did not do this in a week. They did not do this in a month, right? This is the power of building toward that understanding over time. And when you give yourself that longer time horizon, when you give yourself permission to try and try again with engagement, it can yield really powerful results. So in this example, 3 out of 5 voters in their county read their local election guide. The majority of voters turned to them for information about this election. In terms of impact, survey respondents overwhelmingly said the guide helped them to better understand the issues at hand and how to vote. And if you want to talk about a mission for election coverage, that's like the target, right? The listening sessions that they held spurred community action. So some attendees took direct steps to address local issues post-discussion, such as forming citizen groups to advocate for improved infrastructure and communication with government officials. Again, an impact write-up that kind of writes itself. And then I'll also add that the reporters who attended these listening sessions had a much better understanding of their communities. They had more relationships with their sources, and they identified new angles and sources for election-related stories, which they said deepened the quality of their local political coverage. And what massive team made this happen? Here's the Santa Cruz local team in its entirety, right? Incremental approaches work. And so if you give yourself permission to build a little at a time and to learn from what you're doing, instead of trying to do the perfect massive outreach effort right at the get-go, you will be better prepared for coverage. All right. So I want to hear from you, and Jessel, you can go ahead and launch that poll whenever you're ready, but nobody vote yet. All right. Just cool your jets. Give me a minute to explain. I would like to hear from you about what political coverage style your newsroom is voting for. And you can choose multiple options. Once I say go, just relax, okay? You can choose multiple options. And I want to say this is not a trick question, okay? I'm not looking for specific examples here. I'm truly just curious where you feel, everything else being equal, because there are certain stories you have to cover, and that just makes sense. But when given the choice about what to prioritize, what types of coverage tend to matter most to your newsroom? So some of these have like big positives, some of them have negatives. Again, it's not a judgment. It's really just information setting. So I'm going to briefly go through what I mean by each of these. And as I describe each category, think like, yeah, we tend to do quite a bit of that coverage left to our own devices, okay? So let's get started here. What do I mean by campaign mechanics? Follow the money, right? Could be campaign staff drama, could be looking into wealthy donors or insider reports, anything that's looking behind the scenes at what's happening in a campaign, or if you're not in election cycle coverage, happening in the government offices. I once wrote a story about the county executive who later became the governor and how they called their group of alumni the mafia. Great to put above the fold. He loved that. Official centric, right? So looking at profiles here. Do you prioritize profiles in your coverage? Are you analyzing the associates of the candidate or the official? This might be where scandals come in. You got to cover them. Also a resume review, right? Looking at their experience. So personality driven. Let me know if I'm going too fast or if you have any questions. Joy Jessel, if you would watch the chat for me on that. The citizens agenda. Anybody do a citizens agenda approach? This is something we've been talking about at Harkin for some years. This was a term that Jay Rosen at NYU came up with. And this is where the issues that you cover are determined, might be a little strong, but like are informed by what community members are telling you. Santa Cruz voter guide, informed by citizen outreach. Horse race coverage, we know it. We know what it is. Sometimes you need it, but it is linked to distrust of both politicians and news outlets, depending on how much you use. No judgment. Sometimes we have to know who's ahead and behind. What about the issues? So policy and analysis, right? Fact checks, impact, looking to the future about what these policy changes could mean, what options there are. Jessel, I would say a lot of solutions journalism type things might necessarily fit in this category. Theater criticism. There was a debate, there was a town hall, there was a rally, there was a speech. God knows I have written these stories, right? Here's how the event went. User guides, and this would include voter guides, but it could also include how to vote or how to make your voice heard at an upcoming city council meeting, right? How to, who's on the ballot. Last but not least, voter centric. Again, I'm not judging these, but this would include the diner safari, right? We went to a diner and here's what the voters said. Or like a recap of a rally. So like what the voters or the attendees said after an event. Voter profiles, insert group here. What are they thinking, right? Looking at voter profiles. All right, so I'll give you another minute here to cast your votes in the poll. Again, you can choose as many or as few as you like. It's fun to see these update in real time. Campaign mechanics, official. We got a lot of citizens agenda people on the call. Okay, great. I look forward to hearing your experiences. Not so many horse race. All right. Give you 10 more seconds here to cast your votes. We'll keep this running for a minute just so we can see what's coming in. Anything popping in the chat, Jessel Joy? No? Okay. Just want
There's
to be
just a
sure.
question about sharing the deck after, and we'll send the deck and the recording to everybody afterwards.
Mm-hmm. And we do have, let me see if I've got the link handy. I'll send it to you after, Jessel. If you're curious for more information about this, we do have a post we wrote describing these different types of campaign coverage. All right. Anybody want to share, either in the chat or just by speaking, something that maybe surprised you a little bit about looking at this list and thinking about your own coverage? Is there anything this made you think about, wonder? Let me catch up with the chat here. Oh, thank you, Joy. That's fine.
I was impressed how many newsrooms focus on issues versus a horse race, which we know is a trend that tends to go the other way. So I think it's nice to see that we have a group here that's focused on issues.
Yeah, I agree. Thank you. Official centric is so limited, but can be really important. People need to know who their officials are. Yeah, user guides coming up quite a bit. Again, very responsive to people. And I think it's interesting too to look at these in terms of what your coverage makes possible for your audience members, right? So the horse race coverage makes something very different possible than a user guide, for example. All right, I'm going to close it up. Oh my gosh, everybody answered the poll. Thank you so much. You're a highly engaged audience. Is it possible to do it all? I mean, theoretically, but we are living in a world with very limited capacity and resources. I don't have to tell you that. And so part of the reason we start with this is to think about, given the choice, where and what should you prioritize and how will you make that decision? And that's where understanding the needs of those you want to serve, whether they're your existing audience or your community, and we'll talk about the difference between the two in a little bit, is going to really help you inform those decisions. And we've seen it also makes your coverage a little more powerful to have the voice of the community behind you instead of only the voice of a lone reporter. Great question, Melissa. Thank you. All right, so let's get into how we can use that engagement to inform this coverage. Foundations for engagement. We would argue traditionally, and please feel free to let me know if you disagree, the newsroom is telling the audience, here's what you need to know, right? All those things, if you went to J school, you learned about relevance, timeliness, etc. When we talk about the public powered approach at Harkin, we're talking about really asking first, what don't you know that we can find out for and with you? Not here's what you need to know, asking, what do you need to know, right? And when we look at political reporting, it sort of perpetuates this, here's what we think is important. We're going to try to get through the talking points of the politician to what you need to know, versus getting really curious and opening up new possibilities to understand what people need to know. And I think a lot of the challenges, specifically with democracy reporting, is the way that journalists talk about democracy reporting versus how people think about democracy in action in their everyday lives. Again, push back with me on this, right? But I will never forget the news director who told me at a table at an event, oh, our audience does not care about politics. I was like, really? Because I'm pretty sure they care about potholes. So it might be how you're talking about it to them. Agree, disagree? Joy, Jessel? Joy's like, yes.
I mean, it's just so interesting how we frame things and the shorthand we use, and it's different. Like a lot of times we use words like politics or democracy or something as if everybody has a shared understanding of what it means. And unless we dive into curiosity about what people actually mean and what they're actually talking about, the assumptions the assumptions our decision making is based on are just really confusing sometimes.
And even the word democracy can be polarizing, we've seen, which is, yeah, shocking in some ways. All right, so whoop, I lost my little. And I mentioned these ideas of new dynamics, right? And so when you are engaging with your community and audience to better understand what they need to know about democracy, about politics, about elections, with politicians, suddenly it's not just you, the newsroom, asking them a question, it's you asking them a question their constituents want to know that you can point to. And similarly, when you're engaging with the public, it's not just you as the newsroom saying, or the journalist saying, this is what we think is important, and saying, this is what we asked our readers about, and they told us it was important to them. So we're trying to serve you and understand you. Again, it's iterative, it's a process. So defining engagement, because it can mean different things depending on where you are, we really do think of it as an engagement ring. And we'll get into the stages of this process later, but a mutually beneficial relationship. You're responding to members of the public and continuing to solicit their feedback in a way that does inform your coverage. And I get this less now, but especially when we were first talking to people about this engagement concept, I'd have, at least one person in the room be like, well, we don't want the public telling us what to cover. And it's like, okay, they're not dictating your coverage, but they're informing your coverage, right? It's a difference between having however many people you have in your budget meeting, 6, and the 600 survey responses that Santa Cruz Local got, right? We're journalists, we're getting more information. So here are those phases, starting up at the top left in that purple section. We want your input, and we'll talk a little bit more about how you can do that in a really effective way for your newsroom. They give you that input, and then don't stop there, right? Then you're an ask hole. Don't be an ask hole. You have to craft your content and responses. And then crucially, and honestly, I think this is the part where we fall down the most in this process, we have to acknowledge the input from participants. And it can be really easy, right? It can be saying that, this story was informed by your questions, and here's how you can ask the newsroom, right? But you have to signal that it came from the audience. Okay, so let's talk really quickly about different ways you can approach engagement. And this again, look to see where your newsroom is reflected here and to see if that's where you want to be and where you feel like it's appropriate to be, or if you want to move in a different direction. Any of these can be fine. It's the same with the typologies of coverage. Any of these can be fine, okay? When you're extracting information, that is a relationship where it benefits the asker. Okay, this is probably not the best, but sometimes you truly just need information, you're going to get it. Transactional, honestly, a lot of it can fall in here. And again, this is fine. Here's what we want from you. Here's what you'll get. It's just straight back and forth, right? We're going to try to deliver equal value to you to the time and effort you put into this. May not be a long-term relationship, might just be a one-time thing. Fine. Relational is when you get into over time building that understanding of what the public, the audience wants, and looking at not only what can I provide you that's of equal value, but how can we work together to build that value over time, right? And so that might be if you're doing a long-term commitment to, maybe you have a democracy beat, maybe you have something else where you want to continually signal to your audience. I'll also say I've seen newsrooms that generally live in this zone with their engagement. They're very effective at monetizing that engagement because they can prove the value of that relationship over time. So it's something to reflect on. If you feel like you fit one of the categories and you'd maybe like to move into another one, that's something you can take back to your newsroom from this presentation. So how do you know it's engagement? Under our definition, push back if you want to. If there's no pathway for the people you're talking to shape your decisions, it's not engagement. All right, lightning round, pop in the chat. If readers are commenting and no one in the newsroom is reading them, is that engagement? Yes or no? And Howard, I'll get to your question in a sec. We say no, you are correct. Good job. No, that's one-sided. What about a story going viral? Is that engagement, yes or no? No, correct. They have consumed it. That does give you a signal. But if you have not then shaped decisions because of that, then I would say that's not engagement. So I'm going to pause real here. Oh, we've got a yes. All right. If you want to say more about your yes, please feel free to, but if not, that's fine. I don't mean to put you on the spot. It was interacted with. If you knew it went viral, it means you were measuring. Okay, so I like this. This is maybe yes with an asterisk. Let me see if this fits with you, which I would say if you do use that measurement to inform your coverage, then I would give that a yes. I had never considered that consumption did not equal engagement. I'm glad to bring something new to the table to consider. I want to go back to this question about the relational, extractive, transactional. Wouldn't it also be only with a subset of the public? Absolutely. And it's not going to be appropriate everywhere. If you're not going to be there long term, like it does not make sense for a relational approach. Subject to personal whims. Like the whims of the public. I'd welcome you adding a little more context there so I can answer your question. And again, if you want to come off mic, that's fine. It's a meeting. Mm-hmm. Yeah, this may be different from your engagement metrics. And if you've got your own way of measuring engagement, that is fine. We just offer this to consider when you're talking about that really deep listening approach, that public powered newsroom. Okay. I think we're pretty good on the foundations. We're halfway through, guys. It's blowing by. So let's get to some case studies. Democracy, engagement, and action. Mentioned the citizens agenda earlier. We've got a lot of practitioners in the house today. If there's anything you want to say in the chat about, share some links if you have citizens agenda reporting you want to spotlight, or anything you learned that maybe you feel like you wouldn't have necessarily covered with the citizens agenda, please feel free. But at its core, this is a way to engage your communities around questions they have for candidates or officials. And we've seen so many incredible examples about how this can be used. The field guide to local government that WBEZ produced when they realized people didn't know what a comptroller does and had questions about how government functioned. So if you really want to dig deep into the strategy for doing that, that's available at thecitizensagenda.org. And we heard from newsrooms, again, put your experience in the chat if you have one, that it helped them really create better, more original stories that their audiences really responded to, increased trust for the person who was wondering about increasing trust. Again, signaling that this came from the public, and also allowed them to put more practices in place. The person who was wondering, how can I talk my editor into doing engagement so we get more engagement? Again, it's iterative, it proves itself out. And once you see these results, you're going to want to do more of this type of work. And there's research to back it up. So researchers looked at the work that our organizations putting together Advancing Democracy have done with previous cohorts. Horse race framing stories for this group among the news organizations decreased from 27% of stories in 2018, political stories, to 13% in 2022. Transparency increased over the same time period in stories, engagement increased over the same time period in stories, and solutions reporting increased over the same time period. So not only can it be done, it has been done. And if you feel like looking at those typologies, that maybe your newsroom has a little too much horse race and not enough voter issues, trying this approach is the way to start flipping that dynamic. Citizens Agenda. Vox's agenda became the most popular crowdsourced campaign to date in their history. So these next slides, if you need to bring them back to higher ups in your newsrooms to make the case, here are the case-making slides. This is what makes it possible. Enlace Latino NC, they used their citizens agenda to create podcasts and infographics and videos, their stories, their voter guide. This informed their coverage, and they saw increases with their followers, their subscribers, their website audience as they went. I mentioned WBEZ before. They've done a lot of citizens agenda outreach. They've turned this into town halls in multiple languages, right, in the least well-served neighborhoods of the city. And they really made the effort to respond to their community members where they were. I'm going to pause for a second. Oh, thank you, Jessel, for posting that research. All right. And then what worked in 2024 specifically? Let's look at some of the freshest examples. Share the workload, right? So the Milwaukee Journal Sentinel partnered with a university to prioritize voter concerns and foster meaningful discussions on key issues that were affecting Wisconsin residents. And sharing that workload really, really helped them get this done. They were each able to play to their strengths, right? So if anyone's partnering with any organizations, if that's working well for you, pop it in the chat. Love to hear about it. The earlier, the better. You probably don't want to hear me say this. I'm sorry. I'm going to say it. Even though it's an off-cycle election year, it's not too soon to start planning if you've got elections or any upcoming political events in 2026. I'm sorry. WWM started their engagement for the 2024 election a year in advance. So they launched an online survey in November 2023 asking, what keeps you up at night? And they got over 1,000 responses by the next year, which gave them a roadmap for their election coverage. Look for ways to embed this into your workflow. Again, person who's going to be talking to a higher up about doing more engagement. The community engagement that Santa Cruz Local did, which I talked about at the top, that was embedded in the story assignment process. So that ensured that reporters were considering resident input when they developed their coverage. And Santa Cruz Local also required their reporters to attend at least one listening session, ensuring that engagement was widely implemented across the newsroom. Decide who you want to reach. We're going to talk more about this in a minute. The Elmo cake is coming and where. A lot of times, newsrooms hold themselves back because we can't reach everyone everywhere all at once. However, don't forget the time element here. Iterative development works. Santa Cruz Local can reach 600 residents over a period of time, right? And as we'll talk about, it's not necessarily the number of responses you get, but the quality. So thinking about your goals and metrics at the start are going to be really important. Last but not least, cannot be said enough, offer food. Free food and drinks works great. If you're hosting something, I know someone said they were interested in hosting listening sessions, make it a place people want to go. You know, make it have amenities available, the childcare, maybe transportation, like make sure you're setting it up in a way that feels like someone is an honored guest for coming to you. All right. Bottom line, the more your audience feels heard, the more likely they are to trust and consume your work and also pay you. Okay, so let's talk about putting this into work. Yep, make it appealing, provide a service. Absolutely. Absolutely, absolutely. All right, so this is really one of our last big sections, and I want to be sure this is getting to what you wanted to get out of today's session. So again, break in, tell me your questions. Let's look at how you can start truly this week engaging for democracy reporting. Yes, the Atlanta Journal-Constitution is already thinking elections 2026. They just posted this last week. So they're already doing that outreach and consideration for next year. The sooner the better, truly. I know I was always the editor who wanted to wait until last minute to like plan our candidate profiles, and I always regretted it. Question for you, yes or no? Is audience engagement the same thing as community engagement? What do you think? No. All right, let's get into it. Like the no's. There's a great piece by Ariel Zerolnik that gets into the differences. Now, first of all, an audience and a community are not necessarily the same. I would hazard a guess, none of us are reaching entirely every single person in our community with our coverage. Probably not. But also when you're engaging with audiences, you're focusing on deepening that existing relationship, right? Community engagement, you're coming into someone who may or may not have an experience with you and your organization, and you're really looking to understand and introduce yourself and the value you offer to them, right? Oh my God, which one should we choose? There's not enough time. It's okay. You can do both. It's all right. It's really the difference between your house and their house, right? Audience engagement, they have a relationship with your brand and you're probably already reaching them on some platform. So they have some idea of what you're about. These are either owned channels, you know, maybe earned or paid channels, but they know you. When you're going to somebody else's house, Do you act the same way as you do in your own house? I mean, maybe if they're a close personal friend, but probably not. And so you're going to need to do a lot more work with community engagement, not only to introduce yourself, but to build that trust and to start demonstrating that it's worth them getting to know you better. And maybe someday they'll come over to your house. Wouldn't that be nice? So, something for you to consider as you're looking at your democracy related engagement. And this is just a question for you. There's no right or wrong answer here. Are you aiming to serve your community? And you should really have a why for this. Are you aiming to serve people outside your community? And if so, do you have a strategy? I think someone at the top posted about listening events. So here's what we recommend. Okay, here's the Elmo cakes. Oh my God. If you're starting something new, is it better to go with the people who already know you? You've got a little trust built up with them, and they'll maybe forgive you something that's not entirely perfect, right? Start with your audience. Then, after you've workshopped it a little bit, after you've gotten a little better, a little more confident in what you're doing, then bring it to the community, right? I'm sure a lot of you do beta testing for lots of things. You do beta launches of products. God knows if you're launching a website, you have to test for all the bugs, right? This is the engagement version of that. Don't go out with like a big, huge, ambitious effort and then create that horrifying Elmo cake. And that's how they're going to know and judge you, right? Work on it until you get a little better. Anything popping in the chat, Joy and Jessel? No?
Just some good observations about community versus audience.
Excellent. Excellent. Yeah. Appreciate that. Okay. So if you have decided, okay, I want to try something to reach my community, what is this amorphous community? Who are you trying to reach, right? This is where network mapping is really handy. And I've got a ton of resources on the deck that you can get into in detail about how to do this. But essentially, you're looking to quickly identify what you want to connect with people about, who cares about it, and how you can reach them. And this is something you can do truly in like 10 minutes during a weekly budget meeting and just keep trying over time to unlock new possibilities of how to reach people. So we're going to do a quick lightning round here in the chat. All right. We're going to pick a topic, any topic. Person in the chat, what topic would you like to connect with your community about? I'll see if I can do this here. And if someone pops something in there, Joy or Jessel, will you tell me? Let's pick a topic.
Yep, I'm watching.
All right. Pick a topic, any topic. What's something you want to connect with people about?
First,
Loneliness was the first one from Lisa. Oh my gosh, yes,
Ooh.
please.
Okay, the topic is loneliness. Thank you for that. I have never gotten that topic before, but I love it. Fascinating. Just using our imaginations, be your best creative kindergarten selves, okay? No judgment. We're not going by any specific demographic or group. What are some groups that might connect to this topic of loneliness? Some groups of people in your community. What do we got? Seniors, I saw. Interesting. Who else? College students. Okay. The size of the bubbles don't mean anything here. Don't worry. People who moved recently. Ooh. I can type recent movers. All right, let's do one or two more. Let's stretch. Oh, remote workers. It's me. It's Joy too. It's Jessica.
For sure. I mean, hypothetically.
Unemployed. Okay, awesome. Oh my gosh, this is so great. Look at this amazing map. I love it so much. Newcomers. Okay. Let's see if I can successfully share the screen again. Am I successfully sharing the screen or not?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you very much. So I love this exercise because immediately you put a lot of things up on the board, which is great. And then say you're running this in your budget meeting, you're inevitably going to hit a point where you hit a lull and resist the urge to end at the lull. Because what happens after the lull, when you sit in that uncomfortable silence, or nobody has any ideas, is you start to think beyond just sort of your go-to groups, and you start to get really creative. You start to get really interesting ideas here that you can put on the board. And in general, the longer it takes you to think about a group, the less likely that you've already engaged with that group in the past, right? Because they're just not part of your mental network. And then people will reach this point and they kind of panic because they got all excited with all these great ideas. And then, oh no, we have to reach all these people. We have to reach seniors and college students and recent movers. You don't have to reach all of them today. You can try reaching one of them right now and then commit to reaching others down the road. That iterative strength and power is going to be everything here. And when you start to think about, for example, college students, well, what are some places that college students are receiving information, either online or in real life? And then try to get to those places, right? Through organizations, see what kind of information you get back. You're going to their house here, right? Represent yourself, explain clearly what you're up to. Joy, I don't know if there's anything you want to say here about like how best to introduce yourselves.
I mean, one mistake journalists make a lot is not being clear about the reason they're there and assuming that people will automatically be excited to engage with them. And so I think just the more you can say about recognizing why people might be wary of talking to you, and the more you can do to sort of earn the right to talk to them by building a safe container for them to talk to you. So here's who I am, here's what I'm about, here's what I do and don't want to talk to you about today, here's the agency you will have in that interaction. Can be really important. A lot of times journalists skip a lot of the shorthand and jump right to like, hey, here's a question, you know?
Like when I would do man on the street, like, hi, I'm Bridget, I'm a reporter with the Journal Times, and I wanted to ask you about XYZ. And they're just supposed to like tell me then, like, whatever they're thinking about that topic. So you can absolutely, yeah, earn the right to talk to them. Thank you for underlining that. So this is, again, a quick, kind of fun, creative exercise you can do to start thinking about that outreach. And when you reach that lull, push forward. And when you hit that panic moment, tell yourself, I can do a lot given the time. I can only focus on what I can do today, right now. Here's what WBEZ did. This was a few years back. They're looking at people impacted by COVID. And so they're like, okay, well, there's health impacts and economic impacts. How can we drill down on those? And then iterate on that over time. So you'll be able to see the resources about this. You can then use this as a jumping off point for your colleagues to really understand why. Remember, I said you have to know the why with your community because you're going to have to explain it to your community. So talk about it in a newsroom first. You get really clear on it. And then understand what the people that you're not connected to, just what do they need to know? Okay. Buckle up. It's time for the most important tip of the whole presentation. So if you forget everything else I say today, remember this. Are we ready? It's the most important piece of advice you will receive on engagement. Questions are your superpower. When you are engaging, whether it's with audiences or communities, you want them to send you questions. Ask for their questions. Why am I saying this 17 times? Because if you ask someone for what issues they care about, they're going to give you 2 words and you won't have much information to go on. What issues do you care about? Healthcare. Okay, I'll write a story about healthcare. Hooray, I engaged. What questions do you have about the issues facing our community? I want to know why prescription drug prices are so high. Now you've got a story. Questions are the atomic unit of all journalism. All our stories are built to answer or address or dive deeper into questions. And so if you, especially if you've ever done an engagement effort that kind of fell flat, it might be because you weren't asking people for their questions. Questions gives you something to respond to. And that a question by its nature is an invitation to respond. And you responding to them is you doing that feedback loop. So I apologize for harping on this, but I cannot say it enough. I'm going to ask you one more time. What is your superpower? Say it in the chat. Thank you, Joy. Yes, thank you, Betsy. Yes, it's questions. Ask people for their questions. You will not be disappointed. It is fascinating. Thank you, Johanna. So you are ready now. You're going to go into your next budget meeting, your next meeting with your editor, your next meeting with your political reporting team and say, okay, We're going to do this engagement feedback loop. We found a group that we want to reach out to. We're going to their house. So we're going to practice this. How are we going to listen? Let's try some things out, right? And this is where you could choose listening sessions. You could choose a survey. You're asking for questions. How do we want to listen this time around? We're not committing forever. We're going to learn and iterate. How are we going to invite participation, right? What questions do you have? And be clear how you're going to use it. And then that next phase, once you've gotten that, how are you going to acknowledge them? It can be as simple as saying, this story was informed by questions and here's how you can ask. But you need, as a newsroom, to know what you're doing at each of these stages to be able to start a strategy. It can be for one story. It can be for a beat. It can be for a project. It can be forever. But whatever level it's at, you need to understand these elements. Okay. I want to be sure we have time for your questions. So I want to let you know that on August 18th, we're having the second engagement session. And I'm very excited. I'm going to be joined by Stephanie Rivera from Colorado Public Radio. And we're going to talk about challenges with engagement because we have all these wonderful ideas and all this excitement. And then problems happen at any one of those moments along the way. What are some time-tested strategies that newsrooms have used to address, push through, or maybe just regroup after facing challenges with engagement? I was just in a conversation last week. I'm really curious to hear from others of you if this has been the case, saying that there's, given the climate, newsrooms are retrenching from engagement, right? Because it is risky in many ways. We're operating in a risky environment. How do we address that? So that's what we'll be talking about next time. With that, with visions of network maps and Elmo cakes and our house versus their house and Superman dancing in your heads, what questions do you have, especially thinking about your goals for this session? Now's the time to ask. What questions do you have? What tattoo are you getting, Jessel? The Superman?
Question. Just a question mark. Yeah.
Just a question mark. I love that. Just as a life approach. Yeah, let's talk about the viral post thing. And if you want to come off mic, if you can, feel free. Otherwise, if you want to type it into the chat, that's fine too.
Hi, Bridget. It's Claire Ty.
Hi.
I was wondering, I would be curious to talk through what the engagement version of that would look like.
Well, let me give you an example I can think of, and then you can tell me whether or not this suits for you. So let's say you do a post on, pick your topic, loneliness among college students, and it goes absolutely viral. And then as a result of that, you or someone in your newsroom goes to signing editor and says, hey, this post on the loneliness, it got such big pickup, and it got pickup from channels we didn't really usually see. I think there's a lot there. How can we use that to inform future coverage or outreach? And so in the event, you then use that information to craft your coverage, to invite questions from your audience, to dive deeper into the topic. Then I would say it's authentic engagement. You signal back following that cycle, that, hey, we saw a lot of you cared about this topic, and so we're going to do this. Now, where it would be just the ask hole is if it goes viral and you go, it went viral. That's not engagement. That is a metric on digital, but it hasn't actually changed your coverage. Does that make sense? That sort of distinction?
I love this. Yeah.
Great.
I love this. Thank you.
And feel free to tell other people this as well if you need to. This level setting on engagement. All right, what else we got? Especially goals from the top that maybe we didn't get to in the presentation. I remember something about trust. I remember
let me jump in while people are thinking about what they want to ask with just a couple of things. A couple of you asked about trust, and a bit ago I put a bunch of links in the comments that have to do with elements of trust that we've talked about today. A couple of the things in the advancing democracy world that my team and I at Trusting News talk about. One is the anti-polarization checklist we came up with. A couple of you mentioned, the polarizing climate we operate in. It can be one of the reasons it's dangerous to engage with communities, or it can feel risky, is because people retreat to their sort of extreme views, and comments and digital engagement especially can surface just the worst of how people engage with each other. And journalists tend to talk in a way that can worsen polarization rather than fueling curiosity when we adopt the language of people who have extreme views, or when we adopt the language in general of one side or the other, or of when we, as so often happens, talk about an issue in a way that makes sense to us and our team, but there are things we and our team are missing because we live in our own bubbles and silos, and there are things we don't understand about how some people are responding to coverage. So the anti-polarization checklist is just a resource for reporters and editors as they're, before they publish, to say, are we using battle language where we don't need to? Are we, are there adjectives that are unnecessary here that might signal kind of a bias or a perspective on our part? And then the other thing I'll mention, Kurt talked about, just covering democracy issues in a way that works across partisanship. And Kurt was one of the journalists who helped us a couple of weeks ago with a brainstorming session around the language of democracy coverage. And I'll stick just a very messy, we use like an interactive slide deck sometimes for brainstorming. And so I'm sticking just kind of our messy slide deck in the chat in case you're interested. Journalists were reflecting on what journalists tend to cover well about democracy and what they tend to leave out. I have some research partners who are really interested in drilling down on how we can tie the issues of the day to some principles of democracy that journalists often don't do a good job covering. So we'll be writing more about that soon, but just wanted to let you guys know we're thinking about that a lot.
Thank you so much, Joy. And I'll add, and I apologize, I can't figure out how not to make this link 1,000,000 characters long. But for the person specifically who asked about hosting community listening sessions, we held an amazing webinar recently with Ken Schneck from the Buckeye Flame, which is Ohio's only LGBTQ plus news outlet. And so this is a free webinar. You just register for it, you get the recording, and you get this whole amazing folder of resources that Ken put together for you. So if you're interested in hosting community listening sessions specifically, yeah, I mean, thank Ken. He was very generous with that. All right, other questions. Also, fight me on something. I want to hear what didn't land or what felt confusing or wrong. Tell me what I'm getting wrong.
While we wait for some more responses, I'll just add that after Bridget's next engagement session, we'll be doing solutions journalism, and that's a great way to use the engagement you're hearing from your audiences, from your community, because oftentimes audiences know what the problems are, and they can see that on social media, they can see that, they can talk to their neighbors about it, they can read it in the news, but what they're often looking for is what they can do about it, and solutions journalism provides that. And it's also another way to build trust and credibility, because then your audience and community knows that you're actually there to help them solve their problems, to help them, give them information they can use to hold politicians accountable or just to make their community better. And so we'll be getting into that after engagement. Oh, and we have a hand raised. So S, do you want to?
Yeah. Thanks. This is Sam. Thanks. This has been a great session, Bridget, and Jessel, and all. My only contention with the community versus audience binary is that I guess for a lot of newsrooms, expending resources on the community at large seems like a really virtuous and great aspiration, but at the same time, because of limited resources, it seems like audience engagement becomes the default, and even then, is also can incur lots of expenses, as we all know. And so then the question becomes, yes, we all agree. I think we're all on this call fully agree that the community is important, and we should all strive to try to engage our community, at the same time understanding that sometimes just retaining our audience can be a struggle into itself. So I don't know if you have any just sort of abstract or kind of larger comments on that. I just, something I'm struggling with.
Yeah, I so appreciate that, Sam. Thank you so much for bringing that up. You're absolutely right. And that's why it's so important to have a why when you're engaging with community. I'm sure the last thing any of us wants to do is be a parachute journalist and come in and do something and then never show up again. And it is a commitment, engaging, especially if you're going to be even at the transactional level, but certainly the relational level. You need to be able to show up. And so when it comes to making the business case for engagement. And, you know, I had a sort of brief slide in there, but we've done a lot more work about how this really does convert to meaningful business outcomes. But I always encourage people to think about the levers that are going to help you make the case for the higher up, even if it's not necessarily your personal motivating factor for doing this work. And when it comes to, you know, increasing your relevancy and utility to your existing audience, sometimes engaging with communities and opening up new editorial insights to things that are happening to the community, that can be really beneficial to your audience too. Right? You know, I talk to people who are interested in engaging with under-resourced communities for an audience they have of business and policymakers so that they better understand what's happening in the community elsewhere. And so the levers could be anything from, you know, increasing reach to making the case for impact to increasing your editorial relevance, like whatever is going to sort of shift the conversation into why should I to how could we is going to be the thing I would turn to. But it's a great question, and I really appreciate you introducing that nuance into the conversation, Sam. And with
Thanks.
that, I appreciate it. We're going to commit to getting you all out of here on time. So I want to say thank you, Jessel and Solutions Journalism Network and Joy and Trusting News, my partners in advancing democracy. See you on August 18th. We're going to get real about challenges. And in the meantime, have a great start to your week. Thanks so much.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.